Hola amigos, Dr. Labrinicky. Welcome to Lesson 2 in my 5-part series to help you prepare for the World Languages Pedagogy Praxis Exam number 5841. In today's lesson, we're going to explore language acquisition theories and instructional practices. So this part is going to help you get ready for the first section of the praxis test, which is section 1A. There's going to be 18 multiple choice questions, and this makes up 32% of your exam score. So there's 3 parts that we're going to take a look at. Part A, cultures, literatures, cross-disciplinary concepts. Part B, language acquisition theories and instructional practices. And Part C, professionalism. All right, vamos a empezar aquí. Let's get started. Okay, so eventually you're going to be creating your own lesson plan by the end of the praxis exam. So let's take a look at what this video is going to cover in a lesson plan format to help prepare you to do that. So in our introduction, we're going to take a look at our objectives of today's lesson, some can-do statements with today's lesson, and then also you're going to take a pretest. The main lesson is going to be talking about the ACTFL 5 C's. What are those? Maybe you know them, maybe you don't. Then the main thing that we're going to take a look at is theories that relate to second language acquisition and also some theorists. And then at the end, we're going to take a look at some professional organizations to help you prepare as well. Then after that, there's going to be some guided and independent practice dealing with multiple intelligences. And in our closure, we're going to have a post-test, our summative assessment, to see if we learn anything today. And some materials that we're going to need is our Methods of Teaching World Languages textbook. So basically this lesson is covering chapter 1 in your textbook. And then some websites. I'm going to provide you links in the comment section below. So what are our objectives for today? By the end of today's lesson, you should be able to say, I can recite ACTFL's 5 C's. I can name educational theorists. I can identify second language acquisition methods and approaches. I can list second language organizations. And I can pass the World Languages Pedagogy Praxis Exam is our objective for this lesson. So just take out a piece of paper or on your computer. We're going to do a pretest and pause the video if you need some time to work on that. But in the pretest, let's see how much we know before we get started. And then at the end of the lesson, we can compare that with our post-test, and hopefully we've learned something in preparation of this praxis exam. So number 1, see if you can list ACTFL's 5 C's, and hopefully you know what ACTFL stands for. We're going to look at that later in depth as well. Number 2, name theorists and second language acquisition methods and approaches. See how many you can list. And pretest activity number 3 is see if you can cite some second language acquisition organizations. So pause the video if you need to. I'm going to go on to the next slide. Okay, so let's take a look at the beginning information that we need to know here. So in today's lesson, it's just some background information. Up next in lesson 3, then you're going to apply this information into classroom preparation. So ACTFL stands for the American Council of Teaching Foreign Languages, and this is the 5 C's. So we got communication. What's communication? Basically second language proficiency. Can we communicate in a second language, and at what level? The second C is cultures. So we want to be able to compare and contrast our culture with the culture that we're learning to speak and communicate in. The connections C is with other disciplines. So it could be relating to music or math or history, geography, things like that. How can we connect with what we're learning with our second language to other disciplines? The fourth C is comparisons. We want to compare our first language with our second language. How do they compare? How do they differ? And our last C is communities. So we don't want to just be able to use our language in the classroom, but how can we use it out in the real world? And then also, how can our students become lifelong learners? And those are the 5 C's. So we need to know them at this point in time, just kind of memorize them. And then in next lesson, lesson number 3, we're going to look at how do we implement them more into the classroom. And eventually we're working towards creating a lesson plan in preparation of this praxis test. Okay, so part B, what is our goal of second language acquisition? We want to kind of think backward design. So we want to think what's our end goal? And then from the very beginning lesson in level 1 of our language learning, how do we prepare our students to get ready for that goal. So we need to figure out what are the goals of our students. Is it, do they want to be involved in business in the future? Are they just learning the language for enjoyment? Do they want to be able to communicate? Do they want to travel? Do they just want to meet the university requirements that they're trying to get in? Do they want to become a translator? So depending on our students' goals, there's going to be different ways that we're going to get them there. And so probably the best thing that you can do is just give the students maybe a survey. What I like to do with my students on the very first day is say, why do you want to learn a second language? And then from there I get to know them a little bit better and know what are their goals that we're working towards. Some other goals that students might have might be summative assessment, such as an advanced placement exam. They want to get college credit or international baccalaureate exam. Or maybe it's a project-based learning where they want to complete a task or a goal, and that's something that we're working towards. So the very first thing is we need to establish what's the goal that we're working towards, and that way we know if we're on the right path or not. Okay, so we need to learn some background information about some different second language acquisition theories and theorists. And this just kind of sets the groundwork for preparing students to start learning a second language. So these theorists, they help explain variations in student achievement. So if I take a group of students, have them in the same classroom, and have them go through the same unit, and then at the end give them a test, some students might not do some very well. Some students might get a C, some might get an A on the test. So why is that? They all had the same experience. Well, second language acquisition theories help to explain that, and then also help us to improve our instruction and then the acquisition of a second language for students. So something that's very important here that we need to know is that each student is a unique learner and is going to learn in a unique way. And it's important for us as the teacher then to implement differentiated instruction. And that's what these theories are going to help explain a little bit more and help us support us in our task to do that. Okay, so we'll start with some of our second language acquisition approaches and methods. One of them is the grammar translation method. So this has typically been used in the past with the students learning Latin and Greek. They would read something and learn how to translate it, and then they would translate it into their native language, probably English. So maybe we could still even use this concept a little bit. If we want to maybe look at reading something, we could still translate it, or looking at song lyrics, and then we could compare and contrast. Okay, how did the languages translate, or how do they not translate exactly word for word? Another method is the direct approach. So typically textbooks are going to use this approach. They're going to teach grammar, they're going to teach vocab, and then there's going to be a test. So this can kind of set the foundation for what you're learning and give you a sequence and a scope to follow. And so again, typically we might have a 50-minute class period, and so this allows maybe the most effective use of our time if we just have a short amount of time. Another method is called the audiolingual method, and sometimes the visual aids have been incorporated into this, but in the past this could also be called the military method. Maybe in the 1940s they thought that a later way to learn language would just be to listen to a native speaker saying phrases, and the students would have a headset and they would just repeat after what they heard, and they thought that was a way to develop a language. And so if that's the only strategy that you use, it does not work very well, but it can be used to introduce students to a new set of vocabulary where they practice saying the words, and then now visual aids have been added to help students kind of visualize the word and hear it and say it. So it's not a bad way to introduce vocabulary. Okay, and some other methods that we're going to take a look at. The total physical response, TPR, is a great way to get students up and moving out of their chairs and get their blood flowing and get them active and motivated. So it could be activities like charades where they act something out, dancing to music, acting out a story. Just any way that we can incorporate movement into the classroom can be a great idea. The natural method is how students learn in an immersion setting. So I speak to my daughters in Spanish whenever possible to help them learn a language that way. So input is very important. Students are going to just first off listening to things and seeing things. So, but in an immersion setting, think students are going to be in this maybe 6 or 8 hours a day. so it does take a lot of time, but if you've got the time to do that, it's a great way. And with this one, students can really develop a natural accent and a more native pronunciation of things by doing it this way. The silent way comes from the premise that teachers talk a lot in the class, and when teachers talk and talk and talk, it doesn't allow students time to talk and to produce things. So we need to give the students information, but then we also need to allow them to speak and to communicate as well, and we can't explain everything for them. Sometimes it's good for students to explain things as well. Okay, some other ones is the communicative approach, where communication is the goal. So it could be things for writing and speaking. Examples could be an email or show or tell. For this one, we're not necessarily 100% concerned with grammar, getting every accent mark and spelling everything exactly correctly from the very beginning, but maybe working towards that. But the main goal is to be able to communicate. The cognitive approach comes from a thinking perspective about second language acquisition, thinking about what are some strategies that we can do as a teacher to help students learn things. And so it can be things like repetition, organizing things, summarizing things. What are some strategies that we can use to implement? So taking it from a cognitive standpoint. Another approach is the community language learning, where we think about real world uses, not just classroom usage of the language, but what are some field trips we can take people on? Can we take them to a restaurant, or are there events that we can take them to? And then here are some theorists. And so Piaget is just a general education theorist, and his main ideas are that students at different levels, different ages, are going to be at different levels. So what we do for preschooler isn't going to be the exact same thing that we're going to do to teach a middle school student, and it's not going to be the exact same thing that we're going to do to teach a high school or a university student, because students are going to be at different levels of development as they age. Maslow has a hierarchy of needs, which you've probably studied before, and basically the most important one that we can use for our classroom is we need a safe environment where it's physically and emotionally safe for students to express themselves, to try new things, to feel safe to make an error or mistake. Okay. Coming up next is Chomsky, Noam Chomsky. He developed the universal grammar idea, where the brain is wired for learning a first and consequently a second language. And the main takeaway here is that all students are capable of learning a first language and a second language. So some students might have a disability of some sort, but they can still learn a language, maybe not as the same pace as maybe advanced students, or maybe they need more scaffolding. But the takeaway here is that all students can learn a second language. All right, some more theorists. We've got Skinner, B.F. Skinner. So behaviorism, operant conditioning. Basically, we want to think here is positive and negative reinforcement. So when students do something good, we want to encourage that. And if they do something, maybe a mistake in the classroom, maybe we could, if it's just beginning, maybe it's okay if they make mistakes or use it as a learning opportunity, but we wouldn't want to explain that what they did was horrible, or jump all over them for making a mistake, because mistakes should be a part of the learning process. Then we have Schumann and his acculturation theory, and so this is about getting accultured into a new culture, and we can do that even in the classroom, start doing that. But the main takeaway for this one is the motivation and attitude are important factors. So some students come highly motivated, some students come with a great attitude, and other students we have to help motivate them, explain why it's important to learn a second language, and help them have a fun and excited and a positive attitude about learning language. Okay, another person that we've got is Hymes and the speaking model. And basically the takeaway for this one is using language in context. So going back to maybe the direct translation theorists in the past, or the audiolingual methods in the past, was those weren't really used in context, and that was maybe one of the downfalls of them. So if you just listen and repeat, or translate, okay, what good is it? You can't go out and use it in the real world. So here we need to think about how do we prepare students for actually using their second language skills in the real world. Up next, Bloom's taxonomy, and so you know that there should be a pyramid here, and I'm going to put a link to that in the comment section below. But it goes from easier to harder at the base of the triangle up to the peak. And so kind of what we're doing in this presentation is just kind of maybe remembering and understanding some stuff. But our overall goal for getting ready for this praxis exam is that we can apply this information. Yeah, there's going to be some multiple choice questions we're going to have to answer, but also we're going to create a lesson plan, and we're also going to have an essay that we're going to write as well. So we are going to be creating stuff as well. So keep that in mind. So it goes from remembering, understanding, applying, analyze, evaluate, and create. And so if we think backward design, what do we want to do with our students in each unit or each year is maybe have something that they're creating, a project that they're creating, and that we're working towards providing students with those skills to be able to do that. But the first step might just be kind of knowing some vocabulary, remembering different words, understanding some concepts, applying them until we can actually create a project that we can use and then also apply to the real world as well. All right, then we've got Vygotsky in his zone of proximal development, or ZPD, and he was a socio-cultural theorist. And so keep in mind that, again, second language acquisition is a social process. We're not just going to translate things all the time. We're not just going to listen and repeat, but it's a process where we communicate with other people, and that can be part of the learning process in the classroom, and then also our overall goal when we use the language in the community. The big takeaway here is scaffolding. So students can learn the zone of proximal development is the level that students are at, and we can bring them to the next level and improve their language with scaffolding. So an example for listening scaffolding, and we're going to look at this more in depth as we apply this information in lesson 3 into the classroom. If I want to help students to listen better when they're just starting out, or I think our backward design is we want them to be able to listen to native speakers on a wide variety of topics. But when we're first starting, we need to provide them some scaffolding, some assistance. So one thing could be visual aids, and that's kind of what they've done with the Audiolingual method, now adding some visuals as well. Repetition. So on the AP test, they will repeat things 2 times, but when people are starting out, they could repeat things more. If we add subtitles, if we're watching a video, that can help. And then speed of the speakers. So if I watch a news broadcast, they speak very quickly, but there could be some podcasts where you could speed it up or slow it down. And so those are some scaffolding items that go along with Vygotsky, and we're going to take a look at those more in depth in lesson 3. Up next, we've got Stephen Krashen and his input hypothesis model. And so if we think back to the natural method where we just immerse students, okay, yeah, again, there's going to be a lot of listening and seeing things, but he changed it slightly. We don't just want input, we want comprehensible input. And that's going to allow students to understand the input that we are giving them, where it's not just going over their head, and it kind of goes along with the zone of proximal development and scaffolding. And so we don't just give students input, but comprehensible input, which is important and goes along with scaffolding. So a lot of these theories relate to each other, and other people have been building and building and building. And then the other one that's important with Stephen Krashen is the affective filter hypothesis, where second language acquisition takes place in a low stress environment. And again, this goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So we don't want students to be stressed out. We want maybe a little bit of stress where they're motivated to do stuff, but we don't want it where they're having a panic attack if they say something wrong, or if they have anxiety because they're scared to speak in front of the class. This kind of builds on some of the previous ones: comprehensible input and a low stress environment. Not a no stress environment, but a low stress environment. Okay, and then one of the most important ones here, and we'll do some practice with this, is Gardner's multiple intelligences theory. So back in the past, we would give students an IQ test, and we would determine, okay, the student is intelligent or not intelligent based on these questions, and there's a lot of reasons why that's not a good measure of intelligence. And so what we want to think as we go through the multiple intelligences, each student is intelligent in a different way, and different students can demonstrate their intelligence in different ways as well. So as we go through these, think about which theory or method might these respond to. And so this will be our guided practice, and then we can go over some answers, and then after this we can do some independent practice where you'll come up with some ways that you can incorporate this into the classroom. So bodily kinesthetic, so students that like to move around. What do you think? What might be the method or theory that would go along with that one? So pause the video if you need some time to work. How about musical intelligence? Is there a theory that corresponds to that one? Logical, mathematical, interpersonal, where people like to communicate with other people. So take a few moments, figure out which theory would correspond to these, and then we've got a few more after this one. Okay, same thing here. Which theory or method corresponds to these multiple intelligences? Intrapersonal, where people maybe like to work with themselves or by themselves. Okay, linguistic, people are naturally good at languages. Spatial or visual, maybe people are better seeing things, pick things up more that way. Naturalists, people have a connection to nature and things like that. So think about what would be the theory or method that goes along with these, and then we're going to go over some answers in just a few moments here. Okay, so hopefully you had a chance to think about Gardner's multiple intelligences and which theory or method might support what he's trying to say here. So bodily kinesthetic, definitely TPR, or total physical response, would work well with those types of learners. Musical, we could maybe think of the natural approach. We're going to play music in the background or play music directly for the students. And again, go along with TPR, they could dance as well. But by hearing these songs, they're going to start learning the words to it. So oftentimes we think a song gets stuck in our head and we start singing it. Logical and mathematical, that might go along with the direct approach, where students like to understand grammar concepts and know how to conjugate the verbs and know exactly how it works, so it makes sense to them. The interpersonal could go along with the socio-cultural method, where people like to communicate with each other, and that's their strength. The other one's the intrapersonal. Maybe these people want to do grammar translation. Maybe they think it's interesting, where they can just sit down and work and translate from one language to another and see how it translates or how it's different. Okay, the linguistic strength students. These students are generally going to excel no matter what method or approach we use with them, because that is their intelligence. They're good at languages, but it could be the communicative approach, where we give them an essay where they can write about it, or an email, or they like to give presentations in the foreign language. Okay, the spatial, this could maybe be going along with the cognitive approach. We could maybe have them do drawings, like Pictionary or Pictionario, I call it, drawings that correspond to the different vocab words, and that could be a strategy that we use to help them learn. And naturalists, maybe it could be Bloom's taxonomy. We could have them create something. We could have them create something about nature or a cycle or a system and have them label it in Spanish. And so these are just my ideas. Maybe you came up with the same ones, or maybe you came up with some that were a little bit different. Okay, so for our independent practice then, is you're kind of working on your own here. And what you can do is create an activity to correspond with each of Gardner's multiple intelligences, and then you can share that with the class. So again, here's our intelligences: bodily kinesthetic, musical, logical, mathematical, interpersonal, intrapersonal, linguistic, spatial visual, and naturalistic. And so think of what's an activity that you could specifically do with the students that have these strengths, that have these intelligences, and how would you incorporate that into the classroom? And so in our next lesson, lesson number 3, we're going to take a look at these theories and ideas and the 5 C's, and we're going to work on implementing them into the classroom. Okay, and part C of our presentation here is professionalism. So what do we need to know here? You need to know about professional development. These organizations are going to have advocacy materials for second language acquisition. And the main takeaway here is that everyone can learn a second language, and everyone at every age can learn a second language, from birth until they want to stop learning a language. Doesn't matter. Anybody can start learning a language. People are going to be at different levels. They're going to learn in different ways. There might be different theories or methods that work better, but everyone can learn a language at any stage. And so let's take a look at some second language organizations that we might want to be members of, or that can be great resources for us. Okay, so the main one for the United States is the American Council on the teaching of foreign languages. So you're going to see ACTFL abbreviated quite a few times, but here's a bunch of other ones. Another main one, American Association of Teachers of Spanish and Portuguese, AATSP. And then there's all kinds of different ones for different languages, AATFG, American Association of Teachers of French, AATG, Teachers for German, AATI, Teachers for Italian, AATK, Teachers of Korean, AATTL, Teachers of Turkish languages. So whatever language you're teaching, you need to find an organization that's going to help support you and that you can build a community with and that has different materials. And then you're probably also going to find a state and local organizations where you can go to conferences and connect with other teachers as well. So I will put a description, I'll put a link to some of the main ones in the comment section below where you can just click on them and see what do they have to offer. Okay, so now let's take our post-test. So before we started this lesson, we wrote down ACTFL's 5 C's, some names of theorists and second language acquisition methods and approaches, and also some L2 organizations. So pause the video and list them down here. Hopefully you did better on the post-test than you did on the pre-test. All right, gracias por mirar. This is Learning Spanish with Dr. L. If you're interested in passing your next practice test, AP test, National Spanish Exam, CLEP test, or Spanish language test, you're going to want to click the subscribe button. It's going to give you free access to all of my test prep videos. All right, gracias por mirar y buena suerte en el examen de praxis. Adiós, chao.